Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's stuffiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Crystal Stilts album, Nature Noir. Crystal Stilts are a New York rock band who I've been a pretty big fan of ever since about 2008 when I first heard their album A Light of Night, which in my opinion was a pretty good spacey, trippy, odd, and somewhat off-putting psychedelic and garage rock album. I think the band hit a bit of a creative peak in 2011 with the album In Love with Oblivion, which was one of my favorite rock albums of that year. Still is. It's time to shake the shackles. I described this album in my review as a pure rock and roll nightmare. Lots of reverb on these guitars, very ominous melodies, and tons of energy and just momentum coming from the tightness of the band playing together. And of course, the very deadpan, low-pitched, and disembodied vocals of frontman J.B. Townsend kind of was the cherry on top of this whole thing. The sonic variety was much bigger than it was on their last LP. I think this was just a fantastic album for Crystal Stilts. They ended up following this album up with a somewhat lackluster EP pretty soon after. And now they have dished out a new full-length album, which, while maybe I didn't find it as disappointing as the EP that they followed In Love with Oblivion up with, I'm not really warming up to this thing to the point where I love it head over heels. On this album, the band goes into a decidedly less energetic, psychedelic, and experimental direction, I would say. But to what end, I'm not really sure. A lot of the instrumentation on this thing is much more audible, not so smothered in effects. But the only thing getting rid of the effects has exposed is the band's incredibly simple approach to song and melody writing and performing. It hasn't really added any kind of newfound depth or revealed this aha moment where I'm like, oh, Crystal Stilts doesn't sound too bad without the effects. As much as I like many of the songs from Crystal Stilts' previous records, I'm not so sure how game I would be to hear any of them acoustic or with all the effects stripped back. For me, the effects, the reverb, you know, just the studio trickery was a part of the fun. On tracks like Electrons Rising and Spirit in Front of Me, Crystal Stilts are sounding like a slightly slower and less detailed, less layered version of their former selves. One of the few tracks that sounded actually good with some of the effects stripped back was the song Future Folklore, which had this really swagger-filled guitar riff. Some schmaltzy organs on this thing, as well as this floor tom bass drum beat. This song just romps, it bounces around, it just has that smooth, just danceable, again, swagger that I think Crystal Stilts should bring to the table if they're going to strip some of these eerie sounds back. There was just a really captivating energy to this track. It kind of felt like a slightly creepy take on a guitar riff or just a song idea from Velvet Underground's White Light, White Heat. What I think the band really tried to do on this record is make an album that is not so odd or off-putting or eerie or scary or nightmarish, but maybe put forth an album that's a lot prettier. Because there are a good handful of tracks on here that feature some strings, some layered, arranged strings, like the song Starcrawl or the track Memory Room, which is also an acoustic ballad, and the song Phases Forever too, which also has woodwinds in it that sound nice. The song Sticks and Stones is definitely one of the more light and airy songs that Crystal Stilts have ever put together, with kind of a jangly, sweet little rhythm guitar and J.B. Townsend kind of singing in his higher register, which does sound odd, but in a way there is kind of a sweetness and innocence to it. And even the title track on this LP features some very soft rock instrumentation with this really eerie melody that kind of creeps in really delicately, and this kind of delicate approach isn't really something you usually hear on a Crystal Stilts album. I think the direction that Crystal Stilts are shooting for sounds really great on paper, and I think it sounds really great instrumentally most of the time. However, I think there are moments on this album where some of the loose playing, some of the loose and slow playing that the band delivers, like on Starcrawl, and JB's vocals on pretty much every track, don't really lend themselves to the beauty that I think they're trying to grab for. And sometimes, even though the melodies that they do employ on this album can be kind of pretty, they're not enough. They're really too simple and too short to kind of carry the weight of an entire track that feels really repetitive and kind of mundane, sort of like World Gone Wrong. Overall, I did like this LP. I feel like Crystal Stilts have still kept their aesthetic while trying to change and sort of do something new for the band. At least half of the songs on this thing I find to be really enjoyable, and I have faith that into the future, maybe they'll find a way to take some of these beautiful melodies and more delicate sounds and incorporate them with their strange and odd effects, or go that raw route, go that softer route, but maybe bring a little bit detail into the process so that the songs stay engaging from beginning to end. I am feeling a light 6 on this album. Transition, but what did you think of this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? And what do you think I should review next? Anthony Fantano, Crystal Stilts, Nature Noir, forever.